Shuttle A138, you have clearance for landing on the Von Braun and Shuttle Bay 2. My soldiers.
Steady yourself, soldier. This is Dr. Janice Polito, Commander on staff of the Von Braun. You're safe for the time being. You're recovering from the effects of surgery and will be unable to remember any of your events in the next few weeks. You're on board the Starship Von Braun and something's gone very, very wrong. Some kind of force has hijacked this ship. That's why you volunteered to be implanted with some experimental cybernetic implants. Rely on your cyber interface. It just might save your life. You must find an elevator and come up to Deck 4 to meet me. Deck 4. Can you remember that? But keep your eyes open. They're after us both now.
System Shock 2 is a single-player sci-fi FPS game from the very late 90s, in which a decidedly not passive protagonist
Nah.
traverses an infested space station and attempts to escape with his life and massive cybernetically modified space arsenal. You begin the game by joining the United States military. Not just any of the United States military, it's the United States Space Military. Or rather, the Space Military, Space Navy, or Space Marines. After half a decade of time passes, and you finish your military training in the branch of your choosing, you board a space station, where things rapidly devolve into high-concept rigmarole, complete with robots, aliens, mutants, magic, ghosts, and, spoilers on the plot of a 25-year-old game, killing man, and then God. The crux upon which the story of this game rests is the synthesis of man and machine. This overarching theme pervades the story and gameplay elements in a way that effectively blurs the very fine line between these two normally starkly contrasting ideas. You, the player, get stronger through cybernetic enhancement, given to you by the eventual final boss. So in that way, you are becoming more like what is presented to be the strongest entity in the observable immediate vicinity. But as you do so, you come to realize you are just becoming another one of her horribly gnarled impersonations of man, by virtue of the fact that all of the mutants you have to fight along the way are a result of her intention and experimentation. Shodan, the main antagonist, uses you to clean up a mess she made and perpetuated for an indefinite amount of time for seemingly no reason. Then starts to tear apart the fabric of reality and space-time in, what a relatively unrelated Google search revealed to be, a pleasant nostalgic callback to the first game in the form of Cyber She-God's formative memories. After successfully proving that you are greater in ability than the sum total of her creation working in unison as a literal hive mind, and some action platforming that honestly puts the default 3D template from the Unreal Engine to shame, as long as you don't mind pre-Y2K PC game ladders, she asks you to submit to her, to which you reply,
Nah.
and subsequently clear the smudge obscuring the very fine line between man and machine from the metaphorical screen, all preceding the euphoric fanfare of one of, if not the best end credits themes from a video game. If you're less familiar with older PC games, you may have heard this game mentioned in relation to BioShock, which is a functionally modernized, circa 2007, spiritual successor, with a retro-futuristic that differentiates it aesthetically from that which it succeeds spiritually. Like BioShock, System Shock 2 is a part of the suspense horror genre, and goes about generating that suspense in unique ways. The first thing you will not notice is friendly NPCs. Everything here wants to kill you, to the point where the security cameras spawn hordes of mutants and monkeys if you stand in front of them for too long. And it is very effective, because about half of the voice dialogue used for world building, of which there is a lot, exists as standalone audio recordings found generally on and around the corpses of the people who recorded them. When combined with the very intricate visual storytelling the levels designers put into arranging everything, you get a very interesting expositional device that allows for more cohesive stories than one might get from NPCs that are alive and, well, and talking to you. But those NPCs are cool too, sorta. So they exist, just not physically. Instead, they're in your ear sending you V-mails the entire time, and telling you to meet them in places in the ship to accomplish various tasks that were mysteriously left only partially completed, and covered in blood. By the time you meet them, however, they have all already turned into the first kind of NPC, complete with their own accompanying blood splatters and recorded last words. Aside from the final boss, at least, she doesn't have any blood, so we bust a capacitor in her screen and chart course back to Earth, still sailing stalwart sands a significant stratum of silicon. If I were asked to describe the main gameplay loop of System Shock 2, I feel the most effective point of reference would be as the love child of Resident Evil 1 and Half-Life 1. Contrary to my baseline experience with the love child paradigm, System Shock 2 manages to combine the best parts of these two games into one, and is raised quite well by the grandfather, Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, which I guess teaches it magic or something. A la Resident Evil, you have an inventory, with squares, where you are expected to manage the space physically, and resource scarcity is the primary method of generating a diverse gameplay experience. Unlike Resident Evil, the diversity of gameplay is in the breadth of different viable playstyles the player can choose, instead of just being encouraged to interact with every playstyle. I've played through System Shock 2 a time or three at this point, and all of my playthroughs have been distinctly different and enjoyable in their own rights. You have your guns with bullets, guns with energy, melee weapons, and magic. You can use all or some of these, but the only one you can use in isolation realistically is melee. And unless you really like exploding with the androids you're hacking, this isn't really a viable option long term. As far as resource management goes, the scarcity is interwoven inexorably into the guns in terms of ammo and weapon condition. The energy weapons just have weapon condition, but have to be recharged using batteries or charging stations scattered about the ship. The psionic abilities, Breed Magic, have their own resource that is functionally similar to your HP, but each ability, Breed Spell, has to be purchased individually and used via an inventory item that you were given at the beginning of the game. The melee weapons are free, in that they have no condition or ammo. And the trade-off for melee weapons is positioning, as you will take more damage fighting things up close, but most enemies with ranged attacks also have melee attacks that do a good bit less damage, so overall, the melee feels very versatile, arguably bordering on overpowered if you invest in agility and don't have trouble closing distance. The psionics are useful, but by no means necessary. Early game, there isn't much that utilizes them, much less requires them, and you have to decide during your military draft if you want to start with the magic or not. Due to how magic resource works, you're going to struggle to use it consistently if you aren't basically building your character around it. I think the biggest drawbacks are the magic just feels clunkier than the weapons and requires massive resource investment, but the inclusion allows for a more dynamic playstyle if you decide to pursue it. This go around, I played with some mods that added aesthetic touches to the environments and functional touches to the gameplay elements. Mostly things like graphic upscaling and retextures, but I found a few fun things like different colors for the laser rapier, and a mod that makes your camera shake and movement wonky when you drink alcohol. I saw a mod that I did not use, called Fire the Drummer, or something similar, that removes the almond breaks from the songs in the game, which raises a few questions. The first, and most obvious, being, who would want less Almond Brother in their video game? And the second being, in what way does electronically chopped and sampled percussion not aid in the depiction of high-tech, futuristic space escapade? Aside from the care put into constructing the environment with a heavy emphasis on visual storytelling, I'd say the sound design is probably my favorite thing about this game in terms of aesthetic polish. The auditory ambience lends itself well to the suspense horror feel of the game, with suspense being generated via mechanisms such as positioned binaural audio from enemy sound cues, or the presence of what sounds like modulated enemy voice samples in the backing tracks of certain areas of the ship. This attention to detail feels very well placed, and prompts an underlying sense of disquiet every time you hear it after the initial use of the song around halfway through the lower level of the ship. Getting to enjoy the music this time around was nice, honestly, as the first time I played this game, a little over a decade ago, I did so without headphones. The second time I played this game, I wasn't really paying attention to the music because I was actually using a different mod I highly recommend, that is the multiplayer mod. This game is more fun by yourself if you're looking to enjoy it analytically or really want to meld with the suspense generated by the relative isolation, but if you're replaying it, or I guess you just have someone ask you to play it with you, it is worth the experience either way. To wrap things up, I'd like to talk about the pacing of this game. I discussed this a bit earlier when I touched on the scarcity, but more broadly, this game does a very good job of pacing you with the options you have available. Between the cybernetic upgrades and accessibility of weapons, you always feel like you're getting new toys to play with late game, and early game, the options are limited enough that you're rewarded for experimenting with the new options presented to you. These options generally present in the form of enemy interaction. A good example being the energy pistol being acquired as a viable replacement for the armor-piercing ammo right before you have to fight the faster and harder-to-hit androids, somewhat en masse. There is an energy recharge station in the front of the ship, so ammo management isn't much of an issue, but condition management is something you're rewarded for if you're spec'd into it. I would say the biggest departure from perfection as far as pacing goes for me was around when I got the laser rapier, but I'm wary to consider this an actual departure, considering you get it about halfway through the game, and by that point, I'd put a large amount of resources like strength and OS upgrades into keeping the wrench viable. It was fun. It was a high-tech hack and slash, coincidentally identical to my playstyle in Fallout New Vegas. And that about does it. Thanks for watching my game review. I've been Apogee the Shark, and next time I'll critique something else.